Hello everyone, welcome to China Watch. Today, we'll be talking about the Chinese stock market. After a long period of stagnation, the market recently saw a sudden rise of a few hundred points, drawing in a frenzy of new investors. But what is a rise of a few hundred points? Compared to neighboring markets like Taiwan, Japan, or even India, let alone the US across the ocean, the Chinese stock market is still far behind.
This small rise in the Chinese stock market feels like a brief flash before it dims again. Only genuine economic prosperity and wealth among the Chinese people can bring about real growth in the stock market. However, with the Chinese economy rapidly declining and people's wealth shrinking, can the stock market truly thrive?
Today, let's delve into the fundamentals to analyze what's really happening in the Chinese stock market. The Chinese Stock Exchange under the Chinese Communist Party was only established in the early 1990s, just over 30 years ago. But the history of the Chinese stock market exceeds the lifespan of the CCP regime, having been around for over 100 years.
Back in 1869, during the late Qing dynasty, Shanghai, an international commercial hub, already had securities trading in international stocks. This took place in tea houses, hence it was called tea meetings. In 1920, Sun Yat-sen, Dai Jitao, and Chiang Kai-shek established the Securities and Commodities Exchange in Shanghai, meaning that China had organized stock exchanges long before the CCP existed. By October 1921, Shanghai had over 140 different exchanges, the largest number in the world. After the CCP took power in 1949, the Shanghai Stock Exchange was closed down as a capitalist remnant. Shortly after, the CCP launched violent campaigns against private enterprises and capitalists, confiscating private property under the so-called socialist transformation of industry and commerce. Between January 25 and April 1, 1952, in just over 2 months, 876 capitalists in Shanghai committed suicide. The then mayor of Shanghai, Chen Yi, said on the radio, "I don't understand why so many of the bourgeoisie prefer to jump to their deaths rather than confess."
As you may know, in the 1950s and 60s, the CCP was engaged in nationwide political campaigns, pitting people against each other, while transforming the Republic of China's market economy into a planned economy. The CCP government controlled everything, including land and people themselves, with no personal freedoms, not even over childbirth. Economic development was non-existent, and the country's economy was collapsing. A comparison would be today's North Korea under Kim Jong-un.
By 1978, the CCP was struggling to survive. Close to 20 million educated youths returned to the cities, suddenly increasing the urban population by 10%. These people needed jobs and food. On the other hand, rural cooperatives had no funds to develop, and township enterprises faced similar problems. All these factors led economist Li Yining to propose using joint stock companies to solve the funding problem. In other words, the initial purpose of creating the stock system was fundraising, because the CCP needed money to survive. Around 1990, leftists within the CCP believed that market economy reforms and state-owned enterprise restructuring were equivalent to capitalism, and that stock markets and securities markets were a bourgeoisie counter-revolution against the proletariat. Securities trading was politically and ideologically condemned. Unexpectedly, after the Tiananmen massacre in 1989, the CCP faced international isolation and economic sanctions. Juan Runnan, the former CEO of Stone Corporation and a prominent overseas democracy activist, believes that the severe economic crisis, mainly inflation, was a significant factor that led to the 1989 student movement. The inflation rate reached 28.4% in February 1989, and rampant corruption due to a dual-track pricing system caused public outrage. The sudden death of Hu Yaobang, the former general secretary of the CCP, became the spark for the Tiananmen protests.
After the massacre, Deng Xiaoping realized that economic hardship could lead to political crises. To ease tensions with the West and attract foreign investment, Deng set the tone for continued reform and opening up. On December 2, 1989, then Shanghai Party Secretary Zhu Rongji convened an expanded meeting of the Shanghai Municipal Committee, deciding to establish a securities market in Shanghai and set up a stock exchange.
By November 1990, Shanghai had obtained approval from the State Council and the Central Bank to establish the Shanghai Stock Exchange, with a trial opening on December 1st. On April 30, 1991, the Shenzhen Stock Exchange received its approval. After the establishment of the Shanghai Stock Exchange, it indeed confused the West, leading to the lifting of economic sanctions on the CCP. Deng Xiaoping's 1992 Southern Tour speech was essentially a last warning to Jiang Zemin, who had been pushing for a return to the planned economy, forcing him to comply. Thus, the CCP began to promote the so-called socialist market economy. From this history, we can see that the stock market and stock system born after Tiananmen were tainted by three characteristics that are fundamentally different from the free economic systems in the West. Covering up the CCP's economic shortcomings, rooted in the original sin of the Tiananmen massacre, and serving the political manipulation of the CCP's economic operations.
Before the year 2000, under the planned economy model, only SOEs were allowed to go public and raise funds. Later, some private companies were permitted to list, but most were still excluded. Many Chinese companies listed on the U.S. stock market, including major ones like Alibaba, were initially blocked from the Chinese stock market. To this day, foreign companies are not allowed to raise funds in China's stock markets.
Similarly, in the banking industry, private banks were initially not allowed. Eventually, private banks were permitted, but remained small in scale. Even the few foreign banks allowed to operate in China faced numerous restrictions, and eventually had to withdraw due to unprofitability. In 1992, Deng Xiaoping commented in his report on establishing China's stock market, "If capitalism can have stock markets, socialism can too. We must give it a try. If it doesn't work, we can close it down." What does not working mean? The standard is the Communist Party's interest. The party developed the capital market not for the benefit of investors, but for the party and government's interests. There's a story about a senior party official who, upon learning that unlike bonds, stocks meant the government didn't have to return the money, decided this was something that could be pursued. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, when China established the Shanghai and Shenzhen stock exchanges, the primary purpose was to resolve financing difficulties for SOEs. Former China Securities Regulatory Commission, CSRC, Chairman Zhou Zhangqing publicly admitted, "The stock market exists to serve SOEs." Policies have always favored SOEs, allowing them to trade less frequently, distribute fewer dividends, and pay lower compensation during share reform processes.
The Chinese stock market fundamentally serves as a tool for the Communist Party to extract wealth from ordinary citizens. Over the years, 90% of retail investors have faced losses. Meanwhile, the government earns tens of billions each year in stamp taxes from trading. Most securities firms are state-owned, and their boards are filled with relatives of influential figures. Public and private funds are also largely tied to state and elite interests.
Moreover, various unique characteristics of the Chinese stock market, such as daily price limits, stamp taxes, state shares, legal person shares, restricted shares, state share reductions, share split reforms, and contractual funds, are all mechanisms designed to exploit retail investors. To this day, raising capital for SOEs remains the primary goal of China's stock markets. Currently, SOEs account for 56% of the market capitalization in Shanghai and Shenzhen exchanges. In terms of share count, 80% of listed shares belong to publicly owned companies. Chang Qing, one of the founders of China's futures market, noted at the 2022 China Capital Market Forum that, in state-owned enterprises, it's not the board of directors that has the final say. It's the party committee. The Chinese stock market has become a paradise for the elite and financial tycoons to cash out, while it has turned into a nightmare for retail investors and a destructive force for ordinary investors. Prominent economist Han Zhiguo remarked during an interview that China's stock market has now turned into a market that's rotting and decaying. One major reason is the rampant capital extraction from the market. Here's a statistic. The U.S. stock market, with over 200 years of history, averages 36 new listings per year, with companies coming from around the world. Currently, there are about 7,700 companies listed across the three major U.S. exchanges. In contrast, China's stock market, with only 33 years of history, has around 5,600 listed companies across its three major exchanges, averaging 170 new listings per year, 4.72 times faster than the US, and all the listed companies are Chinese. This great leap forward style of IPOs has embedded a culture of rampant capital extraction in the Chinese stock market.
The Chinese stock market has always been under tight government control, with the biggest beneficiaries being political insiders. These systemic flaws were inevitable.
As early as January 2001, Wu Jinglian, in an interview with CCTV, said,
赌场是有规矩的，我们的股市没有规矩，是一个有人可以看别人的牌的赌场。金融市场它的特点就是信息高度不对称，所以监管的目标就是要严格的执行强制性的披露制度，使得信息透明，然后每一个股市的投资者他掌握了信息以后，自己决定值不值得投，值得用多少钱买这个股票但是我们用了另外一种办法这一种错误的监管路线，就是审批制。这个问题到现在没有解决。
When the Chinese stock market faces a crash, the government mobilizes law enforcement to arrest people, much like in 1949 when the Communist Party violently shut down the Shanghai Stock Exchange. Violence is in its nature, and that nature is hard to change. Looking at stock markets worldwide, 3 essential factors are necessary to maintain a prosperous market. Listed companies with strong growth potential, financing and investment mechanisms aligned with the overall economic fundamentals, and a political and legal environment that protects private property and ensures proper regulation. A flourishing stock market creates a win-win scenario. Companies receive funding and grow, investors make profits, the macroeconomy stabilizes, and the government benefits from tax revenue and political stability. However, China's stock market has developed in the opposite direction. It was established to grow state-owned enterprises, with unlimited fundraising prospects but bottomless investment traps. SOE giants, such as the 4 major state-owned banks, dominate half the market capitalization, despite showing no growth potential. These banks generate bad debts up to 26% annually. In 2023, Pinduoduo ranked among the top 5 companies in market capitalization, symbolizing a downturn in consumption and an economic depression. Comparing the market value of China's top 500 companies in 2023 with 2022, financials dropped 1.06%, industrials fell 14.86%, daily consumption decreased 20.12%, discretionary consumption dropped 10.49%, real estate plummeted 40.83%, materials fell 17.18%, and healthcare dropped 12.13%. The number of companies in these sectors also significantly decreased. Globally, in 2020, Tencent ranked 7th in market capitalization, Alibaba 9th, and Kuaichao Mutai 17th, while the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China was 29th. However, due to the 3-year dynamic zero-COVID policy and the crackdown on private enterprises, China's economy sharply declined. By 2024, only Tencent remains in the top 50, while Kuaichao Mutai's market value has significantly plummeted.
Currently, with foreign capital withdrawing, weak consumer spending, soaring unemployment, and a sluggish real estate market, China's economy is in turmoil. The market capitalization of China's stock market, which accounted for 20% of the global total in 2016, has dropped to just 10%.
In 2024, the U.S. stock market reached a total market value of over $50 trillion, the highest since September 2003, representing about 50% of the global stock market value. Microsoft and Apple are the global market value champions, with a combined value of over $6 trillion, making them comparable to the 3rd largest economy in the world. As foreign capital withdraws from China, other stock markets have risen accordingly. After 30 years of stagnation, Japan's stock market is booming, even prompting Warren Buffett to reduce his stake in BYD and invest in Japanese stocks in 2020. Meanwhile, Taiwan and India's stock markets are steadily rising, outperforming China. Taiwan's stock exchanges reported a net profit of $687.09 billion NT in 2023, up 77.41% from 2022. In December 2023, Financial expert Liu Jiping pointed out that China's capital market lacks fairness and justice in wealth distribution. Initial public offerings, IPOs, and quantitative trading have become joint mechanisms for exploiting retail investors. In February 2023, China shifted from an approval-based IPO system to a registration system, allowing many companies to short themselves right after listing, cash out, and flee. The Chinese stock market system is essentially breeding fraudsters, not nurturing businesses.
China's stock market has turned into a wealth slaughterhouse for 200 million retail investors. Under Xi Jinping's emphasis on political security and the party's control over financial power, the future of China's stock market looks increasingly grim. With real estate accounting for roughly 70% of household assets, and as China continuously lowers interest rates to stimulate the economy, much household liquidity has flowed into the stock market. Currently, the stock market has become a deadly weapon to exploit the wealth of Chinese citizens.
According to Marketplace, since the 2021 peak, $7 trillion in market value has evaporated from China's stock market, averaging a loss of $35,000 per investor. Moreover, funds used in speculative trading, such as Social Security, major insurance companies, state-owned banks, trusts, and various financial institutions, all find their way into the stock market. These funds ultimately come from ordinary people. According to China's Social Security Fund, in 2022, Social Security investment returns were negative 138.09 billion renminbi, with a return rate of minus 5.07%. Officials admitted that the losses were primarily due to financial market turmoil, slowing economic growth, a sharp decline in the domestic stock market, and a lack of market confidence. One netizen summarized the experience of Chinese retail investors. 10 years of stock trading, first losing your car, then losing your house. Eternal price drops leave you speechless. Pharmaceuticals paired with liquor, Swana playing all night long. Photovoltaic and securities go green, making you panic. What will happen to China's stock market? We have discussed the major reasons for the inevitable collapse of the Chinese economy. The withdrawal of international capital and high tariffs from Western countries will lead to economic collapse. The Communist Party itself lacks the capability to develop the economy, as it continuously depletes the enormous wealth created by the Chinese people to maintain its massive regime. Once foreign capital withdraws, exports decline, and the people lose hope, the Chinese economy will lose its lifeblood and collapse rapidly.
The collapse of the stock market will be an important milestone in the overall collapse of the Chinese economy. The Chinese stock market is bound to collapse. Just like the real estate market, every time you sell, it's at a peak. The stock market is the same. Selling now, despite substantial losses, may still prove wise in hindsight. So, for those speculating in real estate and stocks in China, here's a reminder. If you can sell, sell now. The chances are high that the decline will continue. That's all for today's episode. If you like our program, please hit the bell button.